A very good evening to you. Welcome to this evening's episode of the Watchdog as we continue to look back at the year that was. 2022, we were plunged into darkness, perhaps the darkest period in our load-shedding history in as many years. In an attempt to deal with the challenges facing South Africa's power utility, Eskom, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a raft of measures to address the growing energy crisis. In fact, one of several occasions this year on which he made such pronouncements.
The set of additional actions I'm announcing this evening, firstly, are aimed at improving the performance of Eskom's existing fleet of power stations. Secondly, these actions will accelerate the procurement of new generation capacity. Thirdly, these actions are intended to increase the private sector investment in generation capacity. Fourthly, these actions are designed to enable businesses as well as households to invest in rooftop solar installation. And finally, these actions are directed at fundamentally transforming the electricity sector and positioning it for future sustainability. For our response to be effective, we need to understand the problem. In other words, what the problem is. South Africa has installed capacity to produce approximately 46,000 megawatts of electricity, and at peak times when there's high demand, we use about 32,000 megawatts of electricity. However, only 60% of this installed capacity is available at any given time due to some units going through planned maintenance processes and others having unplanned outages. Many of our power stations were built many years ago. The average age of Eskom's power station is around 35 years. Generally, as power stations get older, their performance deteriorates. The construction of our newest power stations, Medupi and Kusile, started late, and they have experienced several delays and also some design flaws. These challenges are being addressed. As a result of this, Eskom deferred essential maintenance to keep the lights on. This is what is causing breakdowns and failures at the moment. The performance of some of Eskom's power stations have been further worsened by extensive theft and fraud as well as sabotage. After years of state capture and mismanagement, there is now a capable and effective management team which is working hard to turn the utility around and reverse years of decay. However, as things stand, we are still faced with an electricity shortage of up to 6,000 megawatts. In recent weeks, a combination of factors resulted in about 18,000 of generation capacity being lost, and this forced Eskom to implement stage 6 load shedding, which distressed all of us. Eskom has to implement load shedding to prevent the electricity grid from collapsing and to ensure that we never experience a complete blackout throughout the country. The agreement that was reached between Eskom and unions has allowed critical repairs to the units that had broken down to be undertaken and normal electricity generation operations to resume. Progress has also been made by law enforcement agencies in tackling sabotage, theft, and fraud at Eskom power stations and other key installations. While these actions to stabilize electricity generation have brought relief from the current load shedding, the system remains unreliable and vulnerable. The shortage of electricity is a huge constraint on economic growth and job creation. It deters investment and reduces our economy's competitiveness. When investors look at our nation, they think that we do not have the capacity to generate enough power for them to build factories to drive their businesses. As this administration, we have already taken important steps to increase generation capacity and to diversify our energy supply. One of the first steps we took to address the electricity shortfall was to revive the renewable energy procurement program that had stopped. We revived it in 2018. Since then, over 2,000 megawatts of solar and wind power has been connected to the grid through bid window 4 of the program. A further 2,600 megawatts of capacity has been procured through bid window 5, which will begin to add capacity from early 2024. We have started to diversify generation by allowing parties other than Eskom to also generate electricity. In June last year, we raised the licensing threshold for new embedded generation projects from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts. This removed the licensing requirement for generation projects up to 100 megawatts that are connected to the grid. This measure enabled these generators to have the ability to sell electricity to one another or to other customers, such as factories, mines, or data centers. We also changed the regulations to allow municipalities to procure power independently. A number of our municipalities are already taking advantage of this process. Eskom recently made land available next to its power stations in Mpumalanga for renewable energy projects, which will unlock 1,800 megawatts of new capacity. Eskom has identified additional land that will be released for this purpose. These actions are significant, and they will make a difference over the coming months and years. We are fixing Eskom and improving the performance of our existing fleet of power stations. Over time, the maintenance program of Eskom's electricity generation fleet has declined. It is now been decided that over the next 12 months, Eskom will increase the budget allocated for critical maintenance to increase the reliability of its generation capacity. We're cutting red tape that has made it difficult for Eskom to buy maintenance spares and equipment within the required period to effect repairs. This point was raised with me by the power station managers as they detailed to me how difficult it has been for them to repair the units that break from time to time because of the red tape and the delays. One of the challenges that Eskom has faced has been the shortage of skilled personnel and engineers. The utility is now recruiting skilled personnel, including former senior Eskom plant managers and engineers from the private sector. Over the next 3 months, Eskom will take additional actions to add new generation capacity to the grid on an urgent basis. As an immediate measure, surplus capacity will be bought from existing independent power producers. These are power plants which built more capacity than was required and can now supply this excess power to Eskom. As part of addressing the shortage of megawatts, Eskom will now also purchase additional energy from existing private generators such as mines, paper mills, shopping centers, and other private entities that have surplus power. A number of our neighboring countries in Southern Africa, such as Botswana and Zambia, have more electricity capacity than they require for their economies. Eskom will now import power from these countries through the Southern African Power Pool arrangement. Eskom will also use interim power solutions such as mobile generators to supplement current generation capacity for a limited period. Eskom will implement a program that encourages efficient use by consumers to reduce demand at peak times. We have spoken in the past about Eskom's huge debt, which stands at close on to 400 billion rand. The debt continues to be a huge burden on Eskom's ability to address its many challenges. Eskom will be constructing its first solar and battery storage projects at Komati, Majuba, and Letabo, and several other power stations. This will result in over 500 megawatts being added to the grid. Eskom will be positioned to carry out its maintenance and investment programs. There can be no longer any excuses that anyone can now offer. These steps will allow us to limit load shedding to lower stages and to reduce the risk of such severe load shedding in the future. Our second priority is therefore to accelerate the procurement of new capacity. Capacity from renewables, capacity from gas, and battery storage. The relevant government departments are working together to ensure that all projects from bid window 5 of the Renewable Energy Program can start construction on schedule. This includes taking a pragmatic approach to the local content requirements for these projects, prioritizing the need to build new capacity as quickly as possible. The amount of new generation capacity procured through bid window 6 for wind and solar power will be doubled from 2,600 megawatts to 5,200 megawatts. We will release a request for proposals for battery storage by September this year and a further request for gas power as soon as possible thereafter. The Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy will issue a determination for the remaining allocations in the Integrated Resource Plan 2019 and will open further bid windows on an expedited basis. There was broad agreement that this process should be hastened once the special legislation has been approved by Cabinet and tabled in Parliament. We intend to enable businesses as well as households to invest in rooftop solar installation. South Africa has great abundance of sun, which we should really use to generate electricity. There is significant potential for households and businesses to install rooftop solar and connect this power to the grid. To incentivize greater uptake of rooftop solar, Eskom will develop rules and a pricing structure known as a feed-in tariff for all commercial and residential installations on its network. This means that those who can and have already installed solar panels in their homes or businesses will be able to sell surplus power that they do not need to Eskom. We do not need a state of emergency or declare a national state of disaster to implement common sense regulations that should help in resolving our energy crisis. We have all the instruments and processes that we can implement. I'm convinced that if we work together and if we hold each other to account, if we meet our time frames and our deadlines and fulfill our commitments, we will be able to end this energy crisis that we are going through and create the conditions for growth of our economy and for job creation. More than that, we will show that we are up to the challenge of rebuilding our beloved country. I'd like to thank you as we embark on this journey of putting right our energy generation, working together.
Throughout the year, experts and analysts weighed in on the president's plans and promises, assessing the likelihood of them putting an end to the load-shedding crisis. Here was one such occasion.
What stood out for me is the new generation capacity that will be procured from renewable energy, the additional renewable energy capacity that will be bought from renewable energy IPPs. That is expanding bid window 6 of capacity by, I think, about 5,200 megawatts. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's also additional battery that will be coming in. The private sector will be enabled to get new capacity without the cap has been taken out of 100 megawatts, as well as they will be allowed to procure more. There'll be regulatory issues. I'm not sure exactly what those, but I guess any environmental impact assessments will be expedited to ensure that they bring in capacity earlier on. What we need to be cognizant of is that infrastructure is not a short-term thing in terms of development. Even though they may have the balance sheets and everything, the whole announcement of the cap, changing of the cap, when it took place, there is inertia that will initially take place with the planning that will have to take place within those entities. It's not something like you switch, you have the balance sheet, you have the money to do those projects, and now you switch on everything. They also still have to go through permitting. They also have to go through application for wheeling with Eskom. And they had in the past to go through a rigorous licensing process that they had to deal with. Now, some of them dealt, depending on the location, with municipalities, which we know some don't have capacity in order to connect to a distribution system in a municipal area, somewhere in a rural location. That needs a lot of planning. So we are happy that at least in terms of the EIA, they are very specific about reducing the time frames there. But we need to understand that all of these projects have got a time lag in terms of planning.
I think the fundamental contradiction, though, in the message is, in my view, the good news is the kind of restoring, I think he said, a maintenance philosophy. Philosophy doesn't actually deliver maintenance, but relieving Eskom's financial crisis to the degree that it can actually fix the existing fleet, which I think in the short term is one of the best ways to address the load shedding problem. But and also the attraction of skills coming back into Eskom. But we have to, I think, ask a question. The utility has been under attack politically for 20 years now. It was one of the finest utilities in the world in the 90s. And then it became undermined by this policy of promoting the private sector through independent power producers. This sent a signal to Eskom that your services are no longer required, that you are going to be history pretty soon. And here we are 20 years later with Eskom still producing over 90% of the country's power, but in a terrible physical condition. So I think the president's comments in terms of rebuilding Eskom or fixing what's wrong with Eskom is very encouraging. What I think is going to be problematical is the emphasis on the acceleration of the independent power producers' role in the electricity system, because that is incompatible with a robust, well-funded, supported Eskom. This pledge to a commitment to a competitive electricity market is, I think, the wrong move. And also, the president said, if I may have another minute to explain, the president said that many other countries have pursued this energy transition package successfully. Well, that doesn't really explain why countries now are moving back into restoring state control over their power systems in Australia, in France, in the UK, and elsewhere. So I think this is because competitive electricity markets don't work. There is no such thing as a competitive generation market anywhere in the world today. It's all done through prior agreements, power purchase contracts, auctions, etc.
The Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, was not impressed with the Eskom either, as load shedding intensified and the power utilities' woes continued to place a heavy burden on the economy.
I think there's general agreement that Eskom has accumulated debt to the extent that its capacity to service that debt now is questionable. And therefore, there's a general agreement in my view in the market. When I look, look at the Article 4 report of the IMF, I look at what the World Bank is saying, I look at what all people are saying, is that the challenges that is facing the government is that we've got to think how to manage that debt for Eskom, not all of it, but some of it Eskom cannot afford. So that's a challenge we're facing. Can you see, you've got this challenge of Eskom, we've got these basic poverty and vulnerable issues we've got to balance with. So that's the first thing we're discussing with Eskom. There's a secondary issue about the performance of Eskom, which is basically a problem. But before I deal with the basic issue of Eskom, I made the point in the budget speech that between 2013 and now, we spent about 300 billion rand trying to fix Eskom than fixing power to the grid. I think a combination of part of this discussion when we are restructuring Eskom's debt must be linked to how to ensure that there's less reliance on Eskom on electricity supply. And while we're fixing Eskom, we've got other players to be able to provide power to the grid, which is country needs. So that's the second thing. The third issue is Eskom's performance. Eskom's performance is very problematic. The CSIR has done a study of the damage in terms of value of the damage done by load shedding, which shows about 338 billion rand, 125 billion rand of that in 1 year. Availability factor at the moment is declining by year, which shows that Eskom's performance is becoming problematic. So we've got, as part of restructuring this debt, to say, how are we going to resolve those issues?
What's the thinking right now?
No, I'm saying to you, I'm still going to be discussing. We're going to meet with our colleagues. We're going to meet with Eskom. Have a better sense. It's difficult to make prescribe now as to what the thinking is, because we need that engagement, which is going to give us a better insight to make a better judgment.
As the power supply crisis in South Africa continues to worsen, on the 14th of December, Eskom CEO André de Ruyter announced his resignation. De Ruyter was appointed with much fanfare, as well as hope that he would be the man to fix Eskom, and he had made a vow to try. 18 months ago, de Ruyter was on this program, detailing what he would do to turn the power utility around.
It's certainly been an interesting week, not that there's ever a dull moment at Eskom. I think the big disappointment obviously has been the imposition of load shedding. That is something that we really try and avoid as an absolute last resort, but the system is just so unreliable and unpredictable that we had no option in order to protect the overall system. And then, as you correctly point out, I was vindicated by being exonerated by the Semenya inquiry into allegations of racism and abuse of power against me. So that was pleasing.
Now, for someone who has been saying consistently over the past, 16 months or so that you've been at the helm of Eskom, we should expect this load shedding for a whole range of reasons that you have articulated before. Why then did you see a need to apologize last week?
Look, I think we as Eskom need to take our share of the blame. There are things that we can be doing better. One of the things that we can be doing better is to manage our outages for maintenance better and make sure that we bring back the units on outage as planned, as scheduled. We have failed to do so in a number of instances, most egregiously the slip on the refueling outage that we've had for Koeberg 1. And that has been a major contributor to the imposition of load shedding. And, we also have to step up and take accountability when we're at fault. And that's the reason for the apology.
Was what happened at Koeberg the first time something like that happened?
No, unfortunately, there has been a pattern of delays in outages across the board. Koeberg has been a plant that has had these disappointing performances before, and hence there was a need for us to take action and implement consequence management.
What did you do in the other instances that you are talking about?
So in the past, you may recall that we have suspended power station managers before. We have moved power station managers where we have believed that they have not performed according to expectations. We have moved them to other roles. And we now, I think, by and large, have a team in place that we believe are competent and capable. But of course, we will continue to hold them to account. These are big roles, big jobs with big responsibilities of national importance, and therefore I believe that the nation expects there to be consequences for not delivering according to expectations.
Indeed, and apologies and explanations can only rub salt into the wound. Now, when you look back from the time you decided to take this job and what you knew then, and then fast forward to today with everything that you have encountered at Eskom over the past 16 months, would you say that perhaps you underestimated the enormity of the task?
I think there are two elements to the job. The first element is the internal challenges, of which there are many and they are well documented. We have an aging set of generating plants, which of course cause us significant challenges. We have customers that don't pay us as they should pay us. We have aging infrastructure that require replacement. And then, of course, there are numerous internal systems challenges in terms of our capabilities in our IT systems, procurement systems, project management, and so forth. But then also, I think what has become quite clear to me is that Eskom, of course, is not an entity that operates in isolation. It operates in an ecosystem of regulatory and legislative environments, and those can consume quite a lot of the attention of management for good reason, I might add. And that, I think, has been arguably my greatest revelation since I joined, is the amount of time managing those particular interfaces.
But we'll get to both the ecosystem, but also the team or teams that you have that should enable you to do the job that you signed up for. But first, what I wanted to ask you is, beyond suspending some of the power managers who are running or responsible for some of the power stations, what did you do? What did you put in place over the past 16 months that hadn't been there before? What did you do differently from what anyone who came before you actually did?
So let's start at the beginning of the coal value chain, coal quality and coal pricing. Coal is an organic commodity which varies greatly in quality, and I don't think that we have paid enough attention to coal quality as one of the key inputs into managing the parameters of our power stations. We've been very fortunate to secure the services of Sandile Siyayo, who's a highly experienced coal manager. He's recently joined us, and he and I have a handshake that coal quality is going to be his primary focus area. We're also focusing on our maintenance. We have implemented maintenance programs with far greater rigor than we have previously done. We are sticking to our maintenance schedules very rigorously. I think in the past, and that's part of the reason why our kit is in such a poor state, we did not adhere to those maintenance schedules. And of course, when you postpone a service on your car, it keeps on running for a while, but eventually that lack of maintenance is going to catch up with you. We are trying to improve the business focus that we apply in terms of managing our costs, and that is where the restructuring, the divisionalization, the legal separation of Eskom into 3 entities is helping a lot. So that process is going very well. We have also, I think, managed to focus quite a lot on operations excellence. We have acquired the services of the best experts that we can find inside Eskom, and those so-called greybeards, which is probably not a politically correct term, are now being deployed to the power stations where they can apply their expertise to particular fields, and they can assist power station managers to ensure that each and every one of the elements is being properly attended to. Now, we are also looking at our transmission business. It's very important that we not only generate electricity, but also transmit and distribute it. And then, of course, we have developed this active partnering concept with municipalities, which we are trying to implement in Maluti Apufong, which is our biggest single municipal debtor. They owe us about 5.9 billion rand, and we are trying to get to a resolution there with the consent of National Treasury that will allow us to act as the agent of the municipality. So it's a multifaceted approach across the entire business, starting from coal to the meter that measures the electricity going into someone's house, and managing that entire value chain, I think, in a business-like fashion, taking data-driven decisions. That's the approach that we are trying to implement at Eskom.
Let's take the one thing that you have control over, which it would appear constitutes a big part of the problem or the problems that you're encountering currently, and that is maintenance. Whose call was it not to maintain you know, the things that were supposed to be maintained. Who made that call, and where are those people now?
Like with any project that searches for the guilty, of course, many of those people have since left the organization. But it's very clear that when we open up the pieces of equipment, when we do this deep maintenance that we are currently doing, the so-called reliability maintenance, that the neglect is worse than I certainly had anticipated initially. That is partly one of the reasons why we incur these slippages on our outages, and that they do take longer. But I think over time, there was a much bigger focus on what Eskom could do for management than what management could do for Eskom. And those, of course, were characteristic of the state capture years.
Now, from where you sit, though, forgetting for a second the role that has to be played by other players in the ecosystem, as you call it. Have you been able to, for example, secure the support of the shareholder representative in cases like the one of Maluti Apofung? Have you been able to get the monies you are owed by people who can actually pay those monies to Eskom?
So where it is within our purview to go and collect monies, we do so. We have gone into all sorts of residential areas, ranging from exclusive golf estates to informal settlements, and we have collected bills where they are due, and we've disconnected people. So I think we've been quite diligent in doing that. But as far as the municipalities are concerned, we are making slower progress than I would have hoped for. The leadership provided by the Deputy President in the political task team has been very helpful. But again, there are numerous obstacles that are put forward by some government departments that delay the process of stepping in and solving this problem. And
obstacles like? Obstacles like?
So, for example, we want to go into Maluti Apofung and collect revenue on behalf of the municipality, and then use that revenue to pay the current account that is due to Eskom for the electricity that we supply to that municipality. The National Treasury is of the view that that money needs to go via the municipality. Now, unfortunately, we are of the view that we'd rather collect those monies ourselves and make sure that the electricity revenue collected is actually applied for electricity. And that's, at this point in time, a bone of contention between ourselves and National Treasury, which hopefully we can resolve with the good officers of the political task team.
Is there a good reason for Treasury to insist that this thing be done the way they say it should be done? Or is it someone playing politics here, disregarding logic and common sense?
Well, of course, my view would be that the Eskom proposal is one of logic and common sense. So I think you'd best direct that question at National Treasury to ask them for their view. We certainly feel that the 38 billion rand owed to us by municipalities is a key contributor to the dire financial straits that Eskom finds itself in. And we feel that there's a disconnect between requesting bailouts from the taxpayer while at the same time not putting out all the stops to collect the overdue municipal debt as best we can.
Is it not in your interest, though, because South Africans are going to judge you by how they experience Eskom? So if you go out of your way to be polite, when in fact logic and common sense dictates otherwise, you are the one who's going to, get it from South Africans. So maybe you need to be quite frank about the things that are standing in the way of you and the organization Eskom doing the job that South Africans expect you to do. So maybe call a spade a spade. If they are creating problems for you or they are not making your life any easier, then you need to speak out.
Absolutely, and I'll speak out in the appropriate forum. I don't think we should engage in a debate through the media, but I do make myself very clear in unequivocal terms when it comes to finding solutions for Eskom's problems, which after all are a major part of the country's problems. If Eskom fails, then there are significant impacts on the country overall. So being engaged as a country in finding solutions to Eskom's problems certainly, I think, deserves a very high priority.
But remember, South Africans look at what is happening and say things are getting worse instead of getting better. And you are the man who is on the spot.
So that is the legacy that we have to deal with in terms of fixing what we have been left with. If you look at the assets that we've got, power stations that have an average age of 40 years, having lived a very hard life, it's not going to be fixed in a short period of time. And that's why we've consistently been saying what the country needs sooner rather than later is the addition of new generation capacity as the solution to our energy shortages.
And I'm going to
fixing what we've got will only take us so far.
Okay, and I'm going to get that in a short while because in a few minutes' time I'll be speaking to some of the people who want to do exactly that. But before I get there, I want to ask you whether you agree with the prevailing view that things have gotten worse instead of getting better.
What you will have seen if you look at the long-term trend of our energy availability factor, that has been on a downward trend pretty much since the early 2000s. And that downward trend is, of course, very difficult to arrest in short order. And therefore, I think, again, while we are doing our level best to flatten out that downward trend and turn it around, the time is now for us as a country to ensure that we can procure new generation capacity as quickly as possible.
Now, I want to talk then about something you mentioned like a short while ago. There's this whole debate around the 10 megawatt cap that is being contemplated, with industry players saying it should be increased to 50 megawatts. A proposal I understand you also support. But the government seems to be lukewarm towards this proposal. Your thoughts?
So this is a policy decision made by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. I'm staying in my lane here, as I've been requested to do, and therefore, we will do whatever we can to accommodate new generation capacity on the grid. The country needs it, as I've just said. We think that there is a pent-up opportunity for us to access this new generation capacity from players who generate electricity for their own consumption, so-called embedded or own generation. And given the limitations that we've got in our system, we think that from a technical perspective, we can accommodate a higher number than the 10 megawatts, but of course, that is not our decision, so that falls within the purview of the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy.
Okay, you're going to stay in your lane. I get that. But here's something that I'm battling with. Because there's been a lot of speculation as to why the government is lukewarm or doesn't really want to fully embrace this proposal of, 50 megawatts. But then you agree that you need this capacity, that these mining companies and other big industrial entities can put onto the grid. Now, there's been speculation, a lot of speculation as to why government is reluctant to do what seems to be the most obvious thing to do right now, ranging from vested interests to protecting Eskom. What I want to ask you is, if the latter is indeed true, the protection of Eskom, that is, being the main reason why the government is reluctant to allow these private players, to bring in extra capacity. Does Eskom need that protection, if that allegation was to be true?
I think there are two elements here. The first one is the protection of the grid. So from a technical perspective, are we ready to accommodate the additional megawatts? And the answer is a qualified yes. It depends on where that capacity is going to be fed into the grid. It depends on whether it accesses a municipal system or an Eskom system, and so on and so forth. But these are technical questions, and they can be answered in a very clinical, technical engineering manner without endangering the grid overall. So I think that is something that we are comfortable with from a system operator perspective that we can resolve. From a financial protection of Eskom, I think one's got to prioritize the economy first of all, and the well-being of our industries and our citizens above the well-being of Eskom in its prior monopolistic way of acting. So when there is load shedding, I can promise you that I would dearly love to have additional capacity available that we can call upon. So I think from a financial point of view, we in any event, if there's load shedding, don't sell those megawatts. So if we can buy it from somebody else and sell it onto our customers, then that would be beneficial to Eskom.
So it doesn't matter to you that these mining companies, the Sasols of this world, the Transnets of this world, constitute or give you 40% of your income. That doesn't matter to you. You want that additional capacity. And if anyone was listening to you right now, those who may still be reluctant to bring these, players on board, you are saying to them they should do it right now, and there's no need to protect Eskom on this.
Well, I think they should do it, again, within the confines of the policy environment, which is outside of Eskom's domain. If you look at the roadmap published by the Department of Public Enterprises for a restructured electricity supply industry in South Africa, the end state for the electricity supply industry is actually quite clear, in that we want to attract more private investment to the generation sector specifically, having regard to the fact that we've got this old and aging fleet that is not reliable and that is not performing as it should. And the legal separation of Eskom, particularly around transmission, is a key enabler to allow us to do exactly that. And hence, we think that if we take baby steps towards that eventual end state, and at the same time address some of our pressing generation constraints, while obviously abiding by the technical constraints of our transmission system, then I think that would be beneficial for the country as a whole.
Last question, a quick one. We've run out of time, unfortunately, Mr. de Ruyter. You may have been cleared of those racism allegations, but people like your former chief procurement officer are still insisting that, as well as the unions, of course, are still insisting that there should be an independent investigation that Parliament should conduct, because the one that the Eskom board instituted was always going to exonerate you?
Well, I think if you look at the fact that two senior counsel, Advocate Nazir Kasim and also Advocate Ismail Semenya, have both rubbished the claims of racism, and in particular Advocate Semenya really went to great lengths to interrogate and ventilate these matters. I would certainly advise individuals who cast any doubt on the integrity of Advocate Semenya to do so with great caution. I think he's an extremely highly regarded silk throughout the legal profession, man of integrity, and his findings, I think, were unequivocal, calling those allegations bizarre, startling, disappointing, irresponsible. So I think that he put his findings in as strong language as he could possibly muster to discharge it. Why any other investigation would come to a different conclusion, unless, of course, there is a political subtext, escapes me, to be honest.
The hunt is on for De Ruyter's replacement. He remains Eskom CEO until the end of March 2023. And that's our show for tonight. Join us again tomorrow, same time.